Um, I'd also like to just say, look, I hope you guys will have lots of questions. I think there's, at some point, we would have an opportunity to answer questions, so it'd be nice to engage further. In thinking about the topic for today's discussion, I had a bit of a headache because there's a huge gulf between what it takes to raise capital or what it takes to raise finance for an idea and what it takes to expand a business, and so I think Chika and the team have given me a really broad spectrum of which to talk, to have a conversation around. But what I decided to do is to, pivot the discussion, particularly around what it takes, in my view, to raise financing at the idea stage. Because I reckon the ideas and the concepts will be relevant to anyone, irrespective of the stage of growth your business is at. So bear with me, if your business is already past the idea stage, I reckon you will still find some relevance in the discussions we'll be having today. Next, do we have the slides going up? Okay. Well, but before I go really far, I'd like to say, first of all, I stand here with a great deal of humility. Nothing I would say on stage today is cast in stone. One of the important things about self-help conversations is that you must learn to contextualize whatever you read or hear within your own context. So I challenge you all to think about that as you get all the ideas you'll be getting here today. So the ideas will be largely based on my experience as an entrepreneur first, and then as an investor secondly. For about 10 to 15 years, sort of practicing in this market. A lot of the ideas I will share would also be biased towards the Nigerian context, and they would probably be biased towards technology businesses because I've spent the most of my career focused in that area of work. But I think the concepts will be generally applicable. Deal?
Deal.
Now, the first thing that I think we must establish is that fundraising is hard work. It's extremely hard. And I think, when you talk to folks that have raised lots of, large sums of investment for their business, you start to get a feeling for how difficult raising capital for businesses can be. In my work as a VC, I engage with lots of founders of some of the companies you might know and admire. And on average, I talk to lots of guys and they tell me that before they ever got to their first yes, they probably got through 100 or even over 100 no's. In essence, to get one yes, they probably held, multiples of meetings. And so the fact of the matter is, this is a hard task. And so it requires a certain level of tenacity, and just being seriously determined. There's lots of evidence of how hard this is, because if you look around you in Nigeria today, we now even have a whole industry built around the whole idea of pitching. How many of you have heard about a pitch event recently? Every other day there's a pitch event here and a pitch event there. Fundraising is so difficult that very recently the central bank had to, send a circular to all banks mandating them to actually lend to SMEs. So this isn't, a strange idea, and it's not unique to you or your business. It's really a global phenomenon. But what makes it super interesting is it's even harder when your business is at the idea stage, for very obvious reasons. At the idea stage, the business is highly risky. There's a saying by someone I really respect, Mike Tyson, who says everyone has a plan until they get a punch in the face. And so very often, you have this idea to build this multi-million-dollar business, but you never really know until rubber meets the road. And so to fundraise at the idea stage requires, a certain level of work and understanding that I hope we can explore today. As they say, ideas are great, but execution is king. Now, as you start to contextualize the whole idea of fundraising, within the Nigerian context, it's even a lot harder. So outside of this climb, people are, very happy to take a bet on, a wild card idea or take a punt on an idea. But because, there's a higher, there's a lower risk tolerance in this market, it gets even much more difficult. And so the real question that I would like to explore with you guys today in this conversation is really to figure out how do you increase your chances of success on the journey of trying to fundraise for your business? How do you stand out of the pack? Because for every dollar, there's tons of people pursuing the finance. One of the most important steps that I find separates folks as you look to fundraise, is something I like to call building an MVP. Anyone familiar with what an MVP is? Anyone? Thanks. An MVP is essentially called a minimum viable product. Think about it as the smallest version of your product, your business, that you can build to test that someone is willing to pay or use the product. The smallest version that you can build to test that someone is willing to pay or use the product. Now, this may not apply to every business, but what you find is most businesses, if you really start to think about first principles and the core of the business idea, there's some very basic version that can allow you to test the idea. And the beauty of going this route is, first of all, you get a lot of learning from the process of MVPing. But what's important is you're also able to send signals that your idea is bankable. Now, very often in our business, we get folks that will send a pitch, a really nicely written proposal with lots of pictures, wanting to raise 5 million, 20 million, or whatever. And the first question we ask is, what step have you taken? What have you done? And very often folks start to fumble, well, I need this money to do this and do that. And I will sometimes challenge folks that, well, if you want to build an online business for dry cleaning, for instance, how about create a WhatsApp group to test that 5 of your friends would actually sign up into the group and use your service? Because if you can't get your immediate network to test your service, then you probably don't have a bankable business idea. And so I find that it's really critical to learn the discipline of testing your ideas as an MVP. Now, even if your business is already, you already have an existing business and you're simply looking to scale the business, typically you're looking to either build out a new feature or a new product line. Always think in MVPs, think in experiments. Because an MVP arms you with data that you ordinarily would not have. And it often helps you fine-tune sort of the new product or new service you like to build. Once you're able to build an MVP, you have fundamentally increased your chances of raising financing. Now, there's tons of literature out there about building an MVP, but I think the first step in building a compelling MVP is getting to the heart of the problem you're trying to solve. Figuring out the main pain points, and there's a concept that I like very much called the jobs to be done concept. It's a theory that was developed by Clayton Christensen. I think we should all write this down, jobs to be done. It's a model that really helps you understand, the core pain points around the problem you're looking to solve, which is really the first step to build a successful MVP. Very often, you find that when you have crossed this chasm, then you can begin to explore the different funding sources. And now I just want to spend some time talking about the different funding sources. Now, typically speaking, on the board here, most people would look first at bootstrapping. But before I do this, I'd like to tell a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was looking through some old documents, trying to reference something from 2013. And then I stumbled upon a folder, fundraising application. I opened the folder, and I stumbled on the document that we had written in 2012. About 10 copies of the same document to about 10 Nigerian banks, application for loan to build, blah, blah, blah. I'll keep it, hush. Now you can guess what happened. We wrote this application for this fantastic idea. We had gone into this partnership with a large organization that had a captive market. So we had a multi-year contract, and we essentially needed money to fund the operation. The contract was such that we will fund the investment and would earn a percentage of fees. Now, we had relationships at all these banks, really senior relationships, did lots of presentations, had lots of promising meetings. Guess how many yeses we got? 0. After months and months of doing lots of meetings. And so what did we do? We went back. At the time, I didn't even understand the concept of building an MVP. And so we went back, and we had very limited options. We could either continue to, be sad and complain that folks weren't funding our business. But, we thought about it. We said, okay, what is the smallest version of this solution that we can build today? And we went back to the drawing board, sold some assets that we had, borrowed money from friends and family, and launched that version. As they say, the rest is history. I think in about 12 months, based on the cash flows the business was generating, of course, banks track your cash flow, right?
Yeah.
We literally started getting unsolicited offers for financing. Would you like to expand this business? We're happy to give you a line of credit. That for me is the best example of what an MVP does for you. Because first off, internally, there were several lessons we would have never learned. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that if we got the finance we were looking for, we would have probably made tons of mistakes. And so we were able to learn on a small platform, but we had evidence that people were willing to use the service, pay for the product, which is really the most powerful signal any business needs. Ultimately, if you can't build a product that users love, you do not have a business. And that's really what an MVP helps you determine. Now let's assume you've done that. You've built an MVP, you have proof that someone is willing to use the service, not necessarily pay. I mean, the best MVPs, you actually are able to collect money from potential customers. But let's assume that people used it for free. Now, how do you then raise capital to move to the next stage? Now, I'd like you to think about what you do next, sort of as a stack. At the bottom of that stack is what you call bootstrapping, which is essentially, funding your business either from your operations or from your savings. What makes this really attractive, especially for venture capital or financial institutions, is that it shows you have skin in the game. It shows that you're willing to also take a punt and you're not just transferring all your risk to other people. If you then move a step ahead, you have what we call friends and family. Very often, your friends and family members are very happy to, experiment with you. They know you personally, and so the risk aversion isn't as high as an external source. But what's really important to think about is, this stack you see on the board is directly proportional to the value of the business or the stage of the business. Generally speaking, it's critical that you have an MVP before you start thinking about talking to a venture capitalist or financial institution. Because typically speaking, folks want to see, evidence in the fact that there is value in this idea or this business. Now today across Nigeria, we have tons of incubators, accelerators. Accelerators would typically require an MVP at minimum. Angels as well. Angels are technically at the same, sort of stage as incubators and accelerators. And then you can then graduate to VC firms. There are several VC firms. The company I work for, Ventures Platform, is a VC firm. And then you then graduate to debt or IPOing. What's really important is figuring out the stage of growth of your business and identifying the different funding sources that fall within that stage of growth. Now, some of the mistakes I've seen people, sort of make is an early stage business that is still, figuring out their MVP, trying to approach a VC firm, or a later stage business trying to approach an angel. It's really important that you figure out what stage your business is in, and then identify the different funding sources that are happy to engage with businesses at that stage. And so if the majority of you here are still sort of ideating and figuring out your idea, I think the focus should be looking between bootstrapping and incubators at the most. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, let's assume that you've built your MVP and you've now identified the funding source you want to approach. Let's dig in a little deeper and talk about some keys for success. Now, every investor, every bank, every lender is looking for profit, either in the short term or in the long term. And what guarantees profit is the ability for a business to scale. And so very often, the first question, if you approach me or you approach my organization, the first question we ask ourselves is, can it scale? It's that simple. How large can this market potentially be? And even if we feel it can scale, if the founder of the business can't visualize the scale of the business, it becomes a challenge. Because very often a financier isn't interested in running the business for you or with you. A financier wants a capable entrepreneur that can leverage the capital and scale the business. And so before you start approaching investors or banks or financiers, you should have done your homework to figure out the potentials in the market. You should have your data points. And don't come quoting 200 million Nigerians. Who has seen that statistic? Because first of all, if you're building a digital product, for instance, even if we assume we have 200 million Nigerians, how are you going to access those 200 million Nigerians from a distribution standpoint? And so, one critical thing that people forget to think about is, yes, you might build the most fantastic product in the world, but distribution remains a problem. How would you reach those people? And so, it's really important that you spend a great deal of time thinking about the scalability of what you're trying to build. How large can it get? How you would distribute this product, what partnerships will be important for distribution. Very often, the companies that we find that leveraging banks or telcos, or larger corporates is often a way to distribute. I'll give another example. There's a lot of excitement around B2C businesses that serve consumers directly. But very often you find that it's really difficult to scale distribution in that manner. And so you find folks now innovating around B2B2C business models. So as a business, how do you leverage another business to reach their customer base, for instance? And so really thinking about distribution, because a good product won't simply walk to customers. A good product still requires distribution. I know they say if you make something nice, it will sell. Not quite. Not quite, guys. That's the starting point. The product itself has to be compelling, but you have to think about distribution. And then there's something I really like, which is from a book called Built to Last by Jim Collins, called your BHAG, your Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. Especially if you're trying to build a large, scalable business or you're trying to raise a lot of capital. The investor is sitting on this other side thinking, how big can this business get? And one of the most compelling ways to communicate that is by having a vision that is bigger than where you are today. A goal that is so big that it's almost scary to you yourself as an entrepreneur. I'll give you a few examples. If you talk to the guys at Google at the early stages, they would say they exist to organize the world's data. Hello? That sounds incredible, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about the millions of gigabytes and trillions of data that exist in our minds, on paper, in all sorts of forms around the world, and one company wakes up to say they exist to organize that data. Do you see how compelling that vision is? And what that does is that, it raises the stakes in terms of how people perceive your business. By the way, I know you're sitting here thinking, how does this then apply to my business? Applicable to every business. So I'll give you an example. If I was going to start a juice making business, for instance, I will probably move my big, hairy, audacious goal away from saying we want to be the leading juice maker to say we exist to change lives. We exist to make Nigerians healthy. Because what that means is it says, yes, we're going to start from making juice, but there's so much more we can do outside of making juice. We can pivot into lifestyle. We can help people with diet plans. Are you guys catching the drift? Always think about the extendability of your business and ensure that as you communicate with investors and funders, it comes out in a very compelling way. There's something called FOMO, the fear of missing out. Every investor is afraid of missing out on the next big thing. And the way you sort of signal that is by, ensuring that your BIAG is very, very compelling. Now, the second thing that I think most financiers and again, a lot of my perspective is going to be biased from the venture side because, that's the industry that I work in. One of the second questions we ask ourselves, once we establish that the business is scalable and can become really large, is can they execute? Yes, it might be a great business, it might be a good idea, but is this the best team to build this business? Now, you're probably looking at yourself that, okay, but what am I going to do? This is who I am. The answer to that question very often is really, when you flesh out what idea you want to work on is and, the next step really is figuring out the expertise that is required and being very frank with yourself to do a self-assessment to say, do I have all it takes to execute on this idea? Now, people, are typically weary of partnering or collaborating with someone else, but very often your team can become more compelling when you collaborate with someone else. And so you would hear many firms say they would only invest in companies that have co-founders. The reason for that is because a well-rounded team certainly has a higher chance of succeeding. And so we would often look at the team to say, look, what prior experience do they have? What are the 2-3 most important parts of this business? So if you're trying to raise money for a business that requires a lot of technology, and you come to me to say you're outsourcing your tech to India, we probably won't have another meeting. Or I'll be nice to advise you to say, well, I think you need to in-house that technology. So it's important to be really pragmatic and identify the key pillars of your business and ensure that you have the capability internally to execute on them. And when you don't have it, then you probably want to consider partnering or collaborating. Now, the third point that I think is really useful in sort of standing out of the pack is having a very clear and compelling why. WHY. The reason this is important is fundraising, whether from a VC or a bank, first rises and falls on the strength of your pitch. And very often, people that sit and listen to pitches all day, they've gained so much experience. I mean, I've heard so many pitches that I technically know when someone is just, pitching for the sake of pitching. But the best pitches I've seen or heard are pitches that stem from a very personal motivation. Pitches that are based off of a compelling experience that the founder has had that has inspired that business. And this is all about originality. Why are you building this business that you're building? Because the reality of it is very often it gets hard. And so the financier wants to see the stickiness you have that would ensure you can persevere through the process. And so, for those of you that have already begun on the journey of building the business, I think this point calls for some introspection, taking a step back to say, look, what is it about this business that fascinates me? Why am I building this business? And then ensuring that you can tie that motivation to your pitch, to your proposal. Because I tell you, you won't only be pitching to financiers, you'll be pitching to your early employees to stick with you, even when maybe you can't pay them the going wage in the industry. You'll be pitching to your early customers to use your service when there's a competitor service that has all the complements. Having that compelling why strengthens the power of your pitch. And so please take some time to reflect on this and develop that pitch. The fourth thing that I want to share with you is something I like to call building an OMTN, the one metric that matters. The one metric that matters. Every business has a metric that matters, and a metric is essentially a measure, a signal that reflects progress. It's really important that you determine what that signal is for your business. And I'll give a few examples. If you're trying to start the next Linda Ikeji blog, for instance, your metric is probably going to be number of clicks or number of visits, right? But it's not always so straightforward. Oftentimes it's very nuanced. So for instance, if you're trying to build the next big restaurant, for instance, you might assume that the metric that matters is the number of plates you serve every day, right? But I'll argue that if you're trying to raise capital, one of the first questions I would ask you is, how many of your customers are repeat customers? Hello? Are you with me? Because what I'm interested in finding out is not only that you can build a scalable business, but that you can build a scalable business that is also capital efficient. So in other words, if I have two alternative businesses to invest in, which of them would leverage the capital most efficiently? And very often businesses tend to spend a lot of time acquiring customers. And so you want to ensure that whatever metric you're tracking is not only measuring the number of customers you have, but perhaps is also paying attention to the efficiency in sort of keeping those customers within the ecosystem. So in arriving at your one metric that matters, I'll encourage you to think about it in a really nuanced way, a way that is geometric as opposed to, lateral, and think about the levers of scale for the business you're trying to build. Now, once you've identified that one metric that matters, you want to obsess about it. You want to ensure that it's all you think about every day.